Hi, thank you all for attending this consulting meeting. We're going to give it a few minutes for all of the attendees to join the meeting, and then we'll get started. Thank you again for joining us this evening. We're going to give it just a few more moments for people to join the meeting, and then we'll get started. All right, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Mike, if you'd like to begin the presentation.
Everybody, welcome. This is a public meeting, or our first consulting party meeting for the Kentucky 8 4th Street Bridge Replacement Project that connects Covington and Newport over the Licking River. Since this is just our first meeting, that we're not here to discuss alternates at this time. We're still in the information gathering stage of our project. We're here to get information and help develop the alternates at this time. Tom, you want to go to the next screen?
All right, so as you all may noticed, at the bottom of your screen, you have the option to submit your questions and comments using the Q&A feature. The chat and the raise hand feature are disabled. So if you have comments or questions that you would like to ask as the presentation is commencing, please use the Q&A feature. You can also switch the view by changing the view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen.
This project is the replacement of the 4th Street Bridge. We are, like I said, it's in the information gathering stage. There was a planning study completed a couple years ago that started the project moving forward to find out what was possible. From that, we received funding in the 6-year highway plan to start the design process. And that is where we are today. We're just in the early phases of the design process. Tom, can you click the next screen? Oh, everyone that's here today, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and the Heritage Council, these are all the partners that we've been working with to gather the information needed or to compile the information that we need to present to help in the development of our alternates. Our Stantec is the prime consultant for this project. QK4 is our environmental sub, and Razor is our public relations experts, helping us put on this webinar and developing our webpage. Next. No, I was already given the project overview. Hit the next screen. This is the area that we're talking about, the 4th Street Bridge in Newport, in Covington. Right at the mouth of the Licking River as we get into the Ohio River. You can see the recently reconstructed Route 9 and the roundabouts on the right side of your screen, and you can see downtown Covington on the left, and this is suspension bridge right there at the top of the screen. So this is the area that we're going to be looking at with this project, and this is where we will ultimately be developing the alternates to replace the bridge here. Next. The planning study was completed in 2016. What we will be doing now is we're examining all the existing conditions, be it the bridge conditions of the bridge itself, the traffic conditions out there, the environmental conditions out there, the historic impacts, the environmental justice. We are conducting all of these environmental studies to help us develop the purpose and need of the project. As we're doing that, we'll also be conducting public outreach to make sure that we're not missing any key points as we develop these alternates or gather this information. After we've gathered all this information, then we will be developing alternates and evaluating those alternates. Once we've developed alternates and are evaluating them, we will once again get back into a public forum and have a public meeting so that everyone can voice their opinions and express their concerns about the alternates that are developed. But right now we're still developing the purpose and need and gathering the information before we really develop the alternates. Next. Now I'll turn it over to Tom to explain our environmental processes.
All right, thanks, Mike. My name is Tom Springer. I work at QK4 Civil Engineering Company, and we are on the consultant team to lead the environmental effort. So I'm going to present a few slides about the overall environmental process, which is a review of the NEPA process, the big bullet you see there. And then I'm going to talk about more specifically and spend more time on Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And part of that act is the involvement of local consulting parties who have an interest in historic resources. So we'll spend some time focusing on that, and we'll talk about how you can sign up to be one of those consulting parties if you're interested in it. You can also just sign up and keep involved with the project overall, about upcoming public meetings, and we have a comment page and stuff like that as the project moves forward. But if you're interested in historic resources and how the project affects them, then this part of the process is it will be for you. So first, I have about 4 slides on the National Environmental Policy Act, because this project is federally funded and will require federal permits and federal approvals. We have to follow the process laid out in the National Environmental Policy Act, which is its nickname is NEPA, or the acronym. It was enacted in 1969, and is required for any federally funded project. And it culminates with a document, either a categorical exclusion or an environmental assessment and a finding of no significant impact, or an environmental impact statement. And those are commensurate upon the complexity of the project, the controversy and stuff like that. For this project, we anticipate that it will be processed as a categorical exclusion. It's the same amount of information. It's all put out on the table and considered, and we go through the same process, but it's a smaller document that is more fitting for the project at hand, which is the bridge replacement and rehabilitation, or rehabilitation project. All right, so some key elements in NEPA are that when we find historic resources or natural resources or anything, we try to avoid impacts to them. That's what the law is intended to do, but you can't always. We're building stuff, and sometimes you have impacts, and when you do, we try to minimize them. And sometimes we need to work on mitigating them, making them right, fixing what the impacts we had. And then sometimes things go well, we improve them. make it a win-win project or consider it an enhancement. NEPA is intended to be comprehensive. I am so sorry here. We look at everything in the natural and human environment, such as streams, wildlife, flora and fauna, wetlands, endangered species, and hazardous materials. Visual impacts are consideration. So there's air quality, highway noise, socioeconomic, environmental justice, communities, public lands, historic resources, we'll talk about today, and archaeology resources, and really whatever else comes up in the process. The last slide I have here on NEPA is sort of illustrative in showing that it is considered an umbrella law. All the other environmental laws, local, state, federal, fall under the NEPA process and need to be considered and then documented on how we're going to address all these various laws. As you can see on the screen, a couple key ones is National Historic Preservation Act and Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act, which also provides protection to historic resources. So now I'm going to switch to Section 106, go through an overview of that process. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see a flow chart and about the decision-making under Section 106. At the top, the first thing you have to ask is, do we have an undertaking? And the answer is obviously yes, we have a historic bridge and federally funded project. So we start gathering information about historic resources in the area. And on our Zoom meeting here today, we have Trent Spurlock from Cultural Resource Analyst. He is a historian, pre-qualified historian at the Kentucky SHPO's office, as well as the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, who has been working a lot on identifying historic resources in this area. As a consulting party, we invite you to help us understand what the resources are. Moving down the flow chart is you initiate consultation, and that is exactly what we're doing here today. Some of you on the call have received an email or an invite because we know that you're a consulting party and are interested. Others we have not been able to cast a broad reach yet, and that's what we intend to do today. So we're inviting you to participate in the process. You see on the right side in the flow chart, there's numbers 1, 2, and 3. Those are the major points in the process where we get together with consulting parties. So we have today's meeting. After this, we will have a list of consulting parties, and we will send you a report on the eligible historic resources. And then we'll come back together and talk about how the project could have an effect on those historic resources. And then our last meeting, or the third major step, is to come together and see how we can mitigate or resolve those consulting parties. Adverse effects. So the consulting parties, what that is specifically, it is a phrase that comes out of the National Historic Preservation Act. And they are supposed to be identified as individuals and organizations that demonstrate an economic or historic preservation interest in the project. Since there is a definition of what they are, we ask people to apply. We'll say we're very generous on approving, applications. But when you apply, it brings you to the table for consideration of historic resources and those 3 major milestones I talked about in the last slide. We identify historic resources, the effects to them, and help us mitigate any adverse impacts we might have. So talk real quick about what the area potential effect is. That's basically our study area. It's a geographic area of where our project is in the sites surrounding them. Here is a map of our area of potential effects. We make it fairly generous, we think, to include view sheds and not everywhere in the world you can see the bridge, but where the change in the bridge could potentially have a change in the environment. So this is our study area. This is where Trent Spurlock at CRA has been looking into all kinds of resources. In this area, we have known the bridge itself is eligible for listing in the National Register. We also have National Historic Landmarks. We have individual historic properties, and we have a couple of historic districts. Speaking of the districts, here's a map of the Ohio Riverside Historic District and the Licking Riverside Historic District. And then you can see to the west is the Covington Downtown Historic District. In the Ohio Riverside Historic District, where the APE overlaps the historic district, we have about 29 sites that we are taking a hard look at and doing an assessment. And to the south in the Licking River, sorry, there's a lag when I hit this thing about going to the next page. On the Licking River Historic District, there are 37 excuse me, sites in the area of potential effect that we're looking at. Now, outside of those two historic districts, there are about 10 sites that are potentially historic, including the bridge itself. Then there's some other sites like the levee, possibly have a change in the historic conditions. We'll take a look at that and how it qualifies. And there's Big Daddy Liquors and some other individual sites around that we're looking at. So a question we often get is what gets listed in the National Register of Historic Places? And those are districts, sites and buildings and structures and objects that they have to be significant to American history. They have to be at least 50 years old to be considered, and they need to retain integrity. If it's a structure, it still has to be a sound structure, for example, or it meets one or more of the 4 criteria for eligibility. Those criteria are events, like a major historic event happened at that place, or say the lives of certain people, of people that are very important to the history of the area and the community, and that is very prevalent in our study area. And then the most common is architecture or characteristics of buildings, the work of a master. They have artistic value, and that's the most common listing. And then the last one is about data or information, criterion D, and that's usually with archaeology resources. So talk about the Section 106 consultation schedule. Currently, we're in the process of identifying and approving consulting parties. That is ongoing, part of this meeting. What we have is project information that we're talking about today, an overview of the process, which is what I'm talking about right this moment, the area of potential effect, the map that you saw there. We kind of touched on the historic districts, and we're inviting you to join if you want. So the next step, after this meeting, we have a list of consulting parties, and we have an approved report on historic resources. We will send that out to the consulting parties for their comments. Then in the future, maybe later, we anticipate later this summer, we'll have design options like the location or the bridge types, and we'll discuss eligibility and the effects of those options to historic resources. And then, as we talked about earlier, later this year, have a meeting to discuss mitigation to any adverse effects we have. All right, so this is a screenshot on how you apply to be a consulting party. It's a very long and clumsy website to write down to try to get to it. But on the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's Section 106 page, you can get to this site. And I assume we're putting a link. There'll be a link on our webpage when that's up and running. And then
yes, there will.
Okay. I don't know if there's one in the chat room or not yet, but We can go to this site, and you can, if you don't get a link directly to the site for our bridge, you can just go to Campbell County or Kenton County, and you'll see the bridge number, which is 6-1086, 6-1086. And that will take you to this screen where you fill out to be a consulting party specifically for this project, as several of you all have done. This is the last slide that I have on the overview of the Section 106 process with my contact information and also Mike Biesel's contact information. So now I'm going to, I'm so sorry about this. There's a slide with the contact information, and here want to hand it back over to the Razor, who's handling the project, handling the presentation.
Well, you can see in the chat box there, they sent out, there's 2 links. One is the link to the Transportation Cabinet's webpage that will provide you a link to the consulting party's application. The other is a link to the project webpage. There you can see some of the project history. You can see links to some meeting minutes. You can find out what is the current statuses of the project as we're moving forward. We'll try to keep that up to date as things move forward. And that's where we'll also post when we're ready for the next public meeting. So don't feel like you have to be a consulting party to be involved on the project. If you just want updates on the project or just want to have a voice in what's happening at the at the public meeting, that's perfectly fine. And we will have a public meeting just to get that input. The consulting parties is more dealing just with the historic impacts of bridge replacement or the historic impacts to the community. So that's it. There's really 2 separate processes to be involved on the project. And that is all that we really have. The next is we're kind of opening it up to, if anyone has any questions, you can just type them in the questions below, and I will, myself or someone on the project team will answer any questions you might have. One just popped up. The Ohio Riverside Historic District, those are the documented boundaries for that historic district. So that, like I said, that is the, yeah, go back to that slide, Tom.
Oops, sorry.
Yep. Yeah, those are the documented historic boundaries of that historic district. Same with the Licking River and the Covington downtown. You can see there's quite a few holes in the downtown one where some buildings aren't in that historic district, but yeah, those are the boundaries for that. Oh, he wants to look at the APE boundaries.
So that is the boundary of the area of potential effect, not necessarily, it's not the same as the Ohio Riverside Historic District, nor the Licking Riverside Historic District. If you, should have superimposed those, but that white line shown on here is closer to the 8. But this slide was talking about there are 29 sites that overlap between both of those 2 historic districts. But the assessment of the project in light of the entire historic district will be considered.
How, they're asking how the APE was chosen.
Is it possible to let Trent Spurlock answer that question?
Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So the area of potential effect was developed in consultation with the Division of Environmental Analysis, with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and also with the Kentucky Heritage Council, the State Historic Preservation Office. And it was basically developed into those areas that were thought to be the existing bridge, or the potential project would be visible from. And that's why I didn't extend all the way up to Riverside Drive. And I was late to the party there, sorry.
Yeah. Like I said, in the chat, there's a link to our project webpage. It's ky8bridge.org. It is fully live, so you can start looking at information. There's our contact information is there. My contact information is there. And there's also a contact us button, so you can send us emails and such there. Anybody else have any other questions, comments, concerns? More. How is the potential effect defined? Well, potential effects, we don't know that until we have some alternates developed. Right now, we're just in the information gathering stage. Once we have some alternates developed at our next meeting, then we can start finding out what the effects of those alternates would be on the historic resources that we've identified. So, like I said, the potential effects, like I said, that's something we won't have until this summer, after we've gathered all this information and can develop alternates. Okay, asking about the timeline to have it fully developed. Right now, the right-of-way funds are in the current budget for 2023. So what we want to do is have our plans ready, have an approved environmental document by the summer of 2022. Then we could start buying property, and at that point. Right now, construction is not in the current 6-year highway plan, but that'll be updated in the next spring. So we're anticipating having everything ready to go to construction by 2026. Next one, would KYTC consider expanding the project to include connection to the Riverfront Commons in Covington? With our project, we will be taking bike and pedestrian access very seriously, and we have committed to developing all of our alternates so that pedestrian access will be accessible fully during construction, so that link will never be severed. And like I said, we will be making connections for bicycles and pedestrians on the new structure that we construct. Can you share when the next meeting will be? It'll be sometime this summer. We need to get all of the information gathered right now. After we've gathered the information, we need to finalize all the approvals of the historic documents so we can get the State Historic Preservation Office to approve what is historic, and then we will distribute that to all the consulting parties, and we will receive comments back on that for our next meeting. So we're anticipating sometime this summer for the next Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. We're anticipating a public meeting would probably be late summer, early fall. Please include bike ped with vehicular. Yes, like I said, we will be taking bike and ped consideration into all of our designs. We are committed to having bike and pedestrian facilities on the new structure when we construct it. And we are committed to maintaining that link for pedestrians during construction. Are areas along the Licking River considered for their historical relevance, even though there is not existing structures? I would turn that over to Tom or Trent to answer that one.
I'll say if they are in the historic district, then they would be definitely taken into consideration. Trent?
Right, and I don't know if they're talking about archaeological sites or just locations of buildings that aren't there anymore. I'm not sure.
The next one is, have we identified the purpose and needs for the project? Also, what do you expect for identify the preferred bridge alternate? The purpose that we're working on is to provide a link between Covington and Newport for multi-modes of travel, be that bike, ped, and vehicular traffic. We have a few more things. Like I said, we really won't have approved purpose and need until we have an approved environmental document, which we would anticipate late this year. And when do we expect to identify the preferred bridge alternative? We won't have a preferred bridge alternative until we have an approved nearly an environmental document. So we're looking about probably mid-fall before we have a preferred bridge alternative. Yeah, it's like I said, maybe even late into the winter before there's a preferred bridge alternative. That has to be determined as part of the environmental document. The question they were asking for is about old trees along the riverbank.
And I mean, part of the landscape will be included, especially if it's part of the historic district. We'll include landscape features. Tom might could speak more to the environmental as far as vegetation and things like that.
Yeah. And also like the Newport Barracks site and the industrial sites along the river.
And it'd be great if they would share with me where the information about those sites. And I'm not sure if my email is on anything or not.
Yeah, if you have any information that you would like to pass on to the historians, to the State Historic Preservation Office, or just so we can document in our processes, please email myself or Tom Springer that information, and we will make sure they get put to the appropriate agencies or individuals.
We want any information that they can share.
Yes, the more information we gather right now, the better decisions we can make in the future.
I know Scott Clark works for Newport and is a historian for the city and a consulting party in the process already. So we'll definitely, Scott, if you can share with that information about the barracks, we'll be definitely take that into consideration in the report.
Someone asked about the 2026 date. That is when we currently, with the current budget, would anticipate construction to begin is 2026. In the current 6-year highway plan, the right-of-way funds are in 2023. The utility relocations are in 2024. And typically it takes about 1 year to 2 years to buy the property and relocate utilities before we could go to construction. When will you be coordinating more specifically with the development team, city, on the designs related to the Ovation and other future plans as well? Once we have something developed, once we've gathered all the information, then we can start developing the alternates. And once we have alternates developed, we will be sharing any information we have with development teams, cities, Ovation, everybody that we can involve. That will be about the time of the next public meeting, which should be probably, I'm thinking October timeline for a public meeting, when we will have alternates developed to the point that they can be shared publicly. They're asking the completion of the construction. A lot of that will depend on the bridge we select, what type of methods of construction are needed. I would anticipate at least 2 years to construct whatever is selected out there. But if we select something that has a lot of part width construction or a lot of unique features, it could even be a 3-year construction cycle. But those are decisions we'll make as we develop alternates and as we figure out what the future project will look like. The question is, did you say construction funds have not been allocated at this time? That is correct. In the current 6-year highway plan that was approved in 2020 by the state legislature, construction funds were not in that plan. But the state legislature will meet again in the spring of 2022 and update that 6-year highway plan and pass another 2-year budget. We do anticipate the construction funds being in that plan that's passed in 2022.
Okay, well, it looks like our questions have slowed down. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to answer those. And thank you, everyone who wrote in. It looks like we have
Another one
a
here.
final question, yes, from Will. If you have other comments or questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A chat over the next couple of minutes. Mike, do you want to take this question from Will and Elizabeth?
There's really no question from Will, it's just a statement. And let's see with Will, Elizabeth's. I've had meetings with the with Ovation, where I was also in charge of the Route 9 project. So we've had some communications back and forth, and we're still actually working on that project on some sewer outfalls and such. So we've worked with Ovation, and they were invited to the meeting. We're trying to reach out, gather as much information as we can before we develop alternates. If there's any information that anybody can provide, we will try to implement it into our designs and make sure we make an informed decision as we develop our alternates. Yeah, is there any coordination with the Army Corps Riverfront Stabilization project? That is not something I have heard of. We are working closely with the Army Corps on the storm sewers in the area and outfalls through the levee. And I'm almost in monthly conversations with the Army Corps, but I have not been in any riverside stabilization things, discussions. Okay. Well,
All
so
right,
there's-
again, I just want to thank you all for your questions and your comments during the meeting. Again, thank you for attending this consulting party public meeting. For more information, you can always visit our website, which is in the chat. Again, that is ky8bridge.org, or you can contact Mike Beazold via the information on our website, and his email is also in the chat. And at this time, we are going to conclude the meeting. Thank you all so much for attending, and thank you, Mike and Tom, for the presentation.